Hi, Misha here. And in honor of U.S. Congress trying to ban TikTok, I thought we would talk about, if not a rare, a certainly uncommon and frankly cool variant of a Chinese Type 56 SKS carbine. And while it's not a Sino-Soviet, not in the strictest sense, didn't get that lucky, it's almost as cool. This is a early production, really first true production run, Type 56, often called a ghost gun because of its markings, or rather lack thereof. We could just as easily call it a first series. So again, we'll talk about its history a bit, not go too much into depth. We've talked about the Type 56 many times before, but this one came into my hands. I thought, why not? It's a good, honest example of a type you don't often get to see. And you know the deal. Before we dive in, please do like, share, and subscribe. But honestly, more importantly, comment. I really like discussing in the comments with you. And if you'd like to help support us, check out Patreon. With that, what makes this noteworthy? For comparison with this early 56, we have a late production Tula SKS 45, and they're virtually identical. Now, Stalin and Mao, even though they were both communists, Marxists, they had some disagreements. But of course, after Stalin met his end, rather fittingly, quite frankly, Khrushchev tried to open up better relations with China, and for a while, they succeeded. For a while. China, for their part, had just won their revolution in '49 and had fought in Korea against the U.S., NATO, in a bit of a proxy war. And so they were combat hardened, but also in desperate need of new military technology. Now, they had started making the Mosin M44 carbine as the Type 53, and the Tokarev TT-33 as the Type 54-1. There was also the Type 51, before anyone says anything, I know. But they wanted something more modern. Now, of course, there would also be the Type 56 AK. But the Type 56 carbine, the SKS, was really well suited to the PLA. And this is really why China ran with this gun. It was almost a footnote in Russian history, being made at Tula for about a decade, and at Ilyich for only 2 years. By the time it came out, it really wasn't needed anymore. It was an insurance measure against the failure of the AK, which didn't fail. But it still had a lot recommending it, and China picked up on that. Well, negotiations were underway by 1955 to transfer technology and tooling, but not just that. Personnel, know-how, supervisors, advisors, a whole thing was going over. And for China's part, they were setting up a big factory, and we're about to just start cranking small arms in the thousands and thousands per day out. And that would include the SKS. The Jiangxi arsenal had been building guns since well before the revolution, supplying Chinese forces. And as it was joining the communist rework, it would receive the designation Factory 296, often just abbreviated to 26, although sometimes also 0296 because reasons. But this would be where the Soviet group would go with their tooling and a bunch of parts to set up production. And by early 1956, they were underway. And they would do a very small first test batch. Basically, they assembled and Chinese assembled alongside, seeing how it was done. Then you would get the true Sino-Soviet guns, about 2,100, some say 2,000, somewhere in that ballpark, which were built in early 1956 which were put together by the Chinese after having received training from the Russians, but they were using Russian parts, including having receivers marked with the Tula star. So these Sino-Soviets really did look identical to this late Tula here, including the later style safety, chrome lined barrel, the standard 20.5-inch barrel, polished bayonet. It's been a long day, I apologize, but I wanted to get this knocked out. Lightning cuts, nice blued finish, frankly. Stock with the sling swivel on the bottom, so on and so forth. So those would be the first ones. Now, the true Sino-Soviet guns are exceedingly rare in America, less than 2 dozen. And since Chinese guns are banned, and unless some come over from like a third-party nation, we won't get more. But in late spring, rolling into early summer of that year, we would get our ghost guns. These were given that name because while they have inspector stamps and they have serial numbers, they don't have a factory marking as such. They do not have the Tula star, but they also do not have the Jiangxi marking yet. So they're just kind of interesting. They look exceedingly like a Russian gun. Much more Russian than later Type 56. And at this time, some small parts may still be Russian. The Russian advisors were still there, still kind of supervising, inspecting, giving helpful hints. And the Chinese are learning their craft. Quite adept at it, I must admit. Chrome-lined barrel. Again, feature-wise, there's not really much to say here. I'm not sure about the wood. Some say that they would use a type of birch, much like Russian. Others say they would use Chinese wood. I know it's often called chew wood, but it's actually a type of catappa, which actually grows here where I live as well. We used to go fishing with it. Well, the worms that lived on the catappa trees. Either way, could have chew wood, maybe birch. Other than that, nice blued finish, high quality guns. And factory 296 was planning on turning out hundreds of thousands a year. So even though this run only lasted until mid-1957, so the ghost gun run was less than a full year, they actually turned out well over 200,000 pieces. And this one's pretty early in the run based on its serial. It's 5 digits. There's no secret codes or sauce to the serial. They're sequential, starting off with 1, going through the Sino-Soviets, and then after 2100 or so, getting into the ghost gun range. This one's 39,000, still a 5-digit. And as far as I know, they would get up to about 85,000 by the end of 1956, and they would roll over to 100,000, up to 200,000. And somewhere between 213 and 214,000, this series would end. Well, kind of. Later on in 1957, they would finally add the triangle marking for the factory in Jiangxi. Like I said, it could be 26 or 296 or even 0296, just depending on the era. I brought out a still early gun here. And then still yet later on, although not too long after, they would introduce a date code system, adding a digit to represent the year. 56 being year 1, 57 being year 2, 58 being year 3, so on and so forth. This one begins with an 8, meaning that it was produced in 1963. So still pretty early. But this one, being made in 1956, is, well, technically a first-year production. That, to me, is pretty neat. And throughout the late 50s, they mostly adhered to the Russian pattern. They even sampled using letters, numerical designations, like Russia and much of the comm bloc did for batches. But instead, they went with their date code system and then rolling over serials and doing this and that to keep things manageable. And 26 would keep making Type 56s until the early 70s. I think it was 71, 70, 71, when they would suspend production. Then they would kick it back up again in the late 70s, running through 79 or 80, 81, some say. And then that would be it. But by that point, other factories would be making them as well. And, of course, many changes would come into the design beginning really in the 1960s and into the 70s. Again, my early one. Here's my later example based on the 22 code. It was made in 1977. This is not an exact science, so if I'm a little wrong, I apologize. And this was also factory coded 0130 because, yeah, in the 70s they spread out. Now, one feature quite early on, I believe around 58, 59, they actually moved the sling swivel to the side on the Type 56. And it would stay there for a while, but then it would move actually back to the bottom. But not always, because sometimes some of the late 80s export guns would have it on the side too. Whatever, it seems like sometimes it was on the side, sometimes it was on the bottom. You would obviously go to a stamped trigger guard. You would go from the long lugged barrel to the short lug, and of course you would even go to the pinned in barrel versus the screw in. Lightning cuts would be deleted, so on and so forth. This is when China really made the design their own. It seems like around 1961 is when they kind of took charge and started making changes, because by that point they had literally turned out well over 1 million of these. They knew a thing or two. Of course, one of the most iconic changes, and something that's just really emblematic of the Chinese Type 56 SKS, the bayonet. Originally, we had a Russian-style blade. But in the mid-60s, the pig sticker came out. Fun fact, some of the early prototype Russian SKSs and the first-year production run from Tula in 1949 also had a cruciform-style bayonet. Not quite this style, but very similar. But by 1950, Russia had switched over to the blade as well. So, just pretty iconic. Albanian SKSs also had it. And just for fun, here's a blade extended versus the pig sticker. It is a little longer. And of course, it requires a different type of cutout in the stock. Kind of a narrow, deep cut for the blade. And a much wider, but actually slightly more shallow cut for the sticker. And of course, yeah, this is in the so-called jungle stock, which fiberglass at any rate. And this would be the same. So those were the big changes. Of course, late production SKSs from China could even have stamped receivers, but those were for commercial and are actually quite uncommon. But again, so was the ghost gun, so I thought it was worth a video. What do you think? Over 200,000 might sound like a large number, and in relative terms, compared to many other guns, it would be. But when you consider that China produced literally millions, so many we really don't know how many, it's small. And the fact that some of them actually made it over, of course this one's Norinco branded, but it's an original. Everything else checks out on it. And it's actually all matching except for one part, the top cover. But the stock, trigger guard, the magazine, bolt carrier, gas system, they all match. Pretty cool, and it's in good shape, all things told. Although I still have a sneaking love for the earlier and later guns for comparison. I love, for example, the kind of lathe marks on this barrel and the simplified receiver. Oh well, they're good fun. If you're going to do SKSs, yeah, Chinese are the way to go. They're not my specialty. I'm mostly focusing on the Russian and to a lesser extent the Yugoslavian. I'm more of a European collector than Chinese, but that's not to say I don't like Chinese. Far from it. But we all have our specialties. I also want to give special credit. There's a YouTube channel called Triangle 26. He does specialize in Chinese SKSs and addresses a lot of the minutiae. So check him out if kind of interested in that. There's not a lot of detailed information out there, aside from like the SKS forums, which is primarily where most of my information has come from over the years, although, again, with YouTube growing, once in a while I will get lucky and find a historical, detail-based channel, not just a surface-level coffee table book, excuse me. With that, I think I'll call it a day. Like I said, I've been recording quite a bit, trying to catch up, but just had this one in, thought it was cool. Mechanically, it's the exact same as everything else. Like I said, 20.5-inch barrel, 10-round fixed mag, 7.62x39, chrome-lined barrel. Nothing special there. Now, the specialty lies in the markings and just the fact that it's a first-year production Chinese SKS. Pretty cool. But let me know what you think. Maybe you disagree. Maybe I'm wrong. But as always, if you could, please like, share, subscribe, and if you'd like to help us out on Patreon, as always, the link is in the description. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.